Seeing an elderly woman dressed in a faded, worn-out outfit sitting in the first-class section of a plane, the flight attendant looked down on her and tried to remove her from the seat. But when she checked the plane ticket, she was shocked. "Excuse me, madam. May I see your ticket, please?" Amanda's voice, clear but slightly tense, broke the quiet stillness of the luxurious space. The young flight attendant stood beside seat 1A, observing with discretion but evident doubt the elderly woman who had just sat down there. The first-class cabin of the Horizon Airways flight from New York to San Francisco gleamed with its usual opulence. Soft leather seats, subdued warm lighting, and the subtle aroma of freshly brewed coffee created an atmosphere of exclusivity. The passengers around her were engrossed in their own worlds, some adjusting their state-of-the-art electronic devices, others leafing through business magazines or closing deals via quick calls before takeoff. In contrast, the woman who had caught Amanda's attention seemed out of place. She wore a simple beige suit which, though clean, lacked the elegance usually seen in this space. On her lap rested a worn leather handbag, its edges marked by the years. She wore no visible jewelry, nor a sophisticated phone. At first glance, she seemed more suited to an economy flight than this exclusive cabin. Amanda, always professional but with a touch of natural curiosity, tried to keep her expression neutral. But in her mind, the questions raced. How did this woman get here? A mistake? Or simply someone who doesn't know her place? The woman looked up calmly, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of patience and weariness. Without a word, she slid her ticket towards Amanda. Her hands were thin and slightly trembling, but the gesture was firm, almost defiant. Amanda took the ticket and inspected it carefully, hoping to find some error that would justify the discomfort she felt. Her jaw tightened slightly as she checked the assigned seat. 1A. However, she couldn't help but notice how the woman's gaze remained fixed on her, serene but penetrating, as if seeing beyond Amanda's professional facade. That eye contact made Amanda look away quickly. There was something about this woman that made her nervous, an air of tranquility mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. It was as if the woman knew exactly what Amanda was thinking, but chose not to confront her. Yet. "Everything is in order, madam," Amanda said, returning the ticket. Her tone was polite, but the slight trace of doubt remained. "Thank you," the woman replied in a soft, measured voice. She added nothing more, but her manner of speaking had a confidence that contradicted her humble appearance. With slow movements, she folded the ticket and put it away in her bag. Then she leaned back in her seat, seemingly oblivious to the murmurs of the nearby passengers who had also noticed her presence. Amanda stepped away a few paces, but couldn't help looking back. As she mentally prepared for the takeoff routine, she felt a kind of unease that she couldn't shake. Who was this woman? Why was she here? The minutes ticked by and the plane began to fill. Passengers entering glanced briefly at the woman in seat 1A, some with indifference, others with a slight expression of surprise before turning their attention to their own affairs. But none lingered for long. Amanda, however, continued to feel the weight of doubt in her mind. Her experience told her something wasn't right. Perhaps I should inform the captain. Just in case, she thought. But as she adjusted the final details in the service area, she realized it wasn't just the woman's appearance that had disconcerted her. It was her demeanor. Amanda, with the ticket still in hand, returned to seat 1A. The woman was still there, calm, as if the discomfort in the air around her didn't concern her. The young flight attendant took a deep breath before speaking, striving to maintain a neutral tone that, nevertheless, ended up sounding cold. "Madam," she said firmly, "I believe there's been a mistake. This seat doesn't seem appropriate for you. First class is reserved for, well, customers with certain characteristics." The murmurs began to spread through the cabin like a silent rumor. From the other seats, a man in an expensive suit looked up from his tablet, raising an eyebrow with an expression somewhere between amused and curious. A woman with a necklace that glittered like the sun leaned forward slightly, her lips twisted in a poorly concealed smile. The woman in 1A, however, showed no sign of surprise or annoyance. Her hands, thin but steady, rested calmly on her lap. She looked up at Amanda, her dark eyes meeting the young woman's with a disarming serenity. "This is my place," she replied calmly, gesturing slightly towards the ticket Amanda was holding. "If there is any doubt, you can check it with whoever is in charge." Her tone was so calm and assured that, for an instant, Amanda hesitated. But that instant passed quickly, replaced by a mixture of frustration and stubbornness. It was her duty to maintain order in the cabin, and she couldn't allow someone who clearly didn't belong in this space to disrupt the balance. "Don't worry, madam," Amanda said, straightening up. "I'll sort this out straight away." She turned on her heel, her shoes clicking softly against the carpeted floor as she walked towards the cockpit. Inwardly, she justified her decision. "I'm protecting the experience of the first-class customers. It's my job." But something in the way the woman had looked at her, as if she knew every thought that crossed her mind, deeply unsettled her. In the cabin, the murmurs grew. "Who let her in here?" commented the man in the expensive suit quietly, but loud enough for several to hear. "Perhaps she made a mistake," replied the woman with the glittering necklace, looking at the woman in 1A with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Although, to be honest, she doesn't look like the sort of person who buys a first-class ticket." A stifled laugh escaped from someone else, and soon others began to join in the conversation, whispering theories and opinions. Some tried to be discreet, others not so much. But the woman in 1A seemed unaffected. She remained seated, her posture erect, her eyes wandering to the window, observing the grey sky that was beginning to clear. If she heard the comments, she didn't show it. Amanda reached the cockpit, her mind still clouded by the mix of emotions the situation was causing her. The captain, a middle-aged man with a serious face and lines of experience etched on his forehead, looked at her expectantly. "Captain," Amanda began, making an effort to sound professional, "we have a situation in the first-class cabin." He raised an eyebrow. "What sort of situation?" "It's a passenger. Well, something doesn't seem right. She's in seat 1A, but she seems out of place. Her appearance doesn't match the typical profile of our first-class customers." The captain crossed his arms, his expression neutral, but his eyes showed a slight shadow of displeasure. "Is the passenger's ticket valid?" he asked calmly. "Yes," Amanda admitted, her voice lowering slightly. "But I thought perhaps she might have mistaken the cabin or something similar. She doesn't seem suitable for the environment." The captain looked at her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll handle this myself. Let's go and see this passenger." When the captain entered the first-class cabin, the murmurs ceased almost immediately. The passengers straightened their backs, adopting expressions of interest or indifference depending on their personal style. The woman in 1A turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting the captain's. For the first time, a glimmer of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps expectation, crossed her face. The captain approached seat 1A, with Amanda following close behind, her hands clasped nervously behind her back. "Good afternoon, madam," the captain said in a courteous but professional tone. "I've been informed of a possible mix-up with your seat. Could you show me your ticket, please?" The woman in 1A didn't move immediately. She observed him for a few seconds, as if measuring him up, before reaching into her bag for the ticket and extending it towards him. Her movements were deliberate, as if each gesture were laden with meaning. The captain took the ticket and inspected it carefully. Amanda, standing beside him, held her breath, hoping that something on that piece of paper would justify her suspicion. The captain held the ticket between his fingers for a few more seconds, his face impassive, although a shadow of bewilderment was beginning to appear in his eyes. Amanda, who until that moment had tried to maintain her composure, felt the air grow heavy around her. The passengers, attentive, awaited a resolution with the expectation of someone watching a drama unfold before their eyes. Finally, the captain looked up at the woman in 1A. His posture changed, his shoulders tensed, and his jaw tightened slightly, as if he had reached an inevitable conclusion, but one difficult to accept. "Madam," he began, but his voice, normally firm and authoritative, trembled slightly. He swallowed before continuing. "I'm afraid I must apologize profusely. You are—" The woman in 1A raised an eyebrow, her dark eyes fixed on him, waiting. The captain bowed his head slightly, and when he spoke again, his tone was barely a whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You are the founder of Horizon Airways." For a moment, silence reigned in the cabin. The whisper of the engines and the gentle sway of the plane in the air seemed amplified in the absence of words. Amanda felt the ground beneath her feet vanish. What did he just say? The founder? A murmur grew amongst the passengers. The man in the expensive suit dropped his tablet onto the table in front of him, his eyes wide. The woman with the glittering necklace opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "The founder?" someone murmured from the back of the cabin. The woman in 1A, meanwhile, remained seated, her face unchanged. It seemed as if she had already anticipated this moment, as if the entire scene had unfolded exactly as she expected. The captain bowed slightly towards her, in a gesture of respect that contrasted sharply with the way Amanda had handled the situation minutes before. "Please accept our apologies," he said in a serious, almost solemn voice. "This should never have happened. We will ensure that the necessary measures are taken so that something like this never happens again." The woman in 1A nodded slowly, but said nothing. After a moment she stood up. Although she was a woman of small stature, in that moment she seemed to fill the entire space with her mere presence. Her eyes, cold as steel, turned to Amanda. "If I weren't the founder," she said in a voice that, though low, felt like a resounding echo, "do you think your behavior would have been correct?" Amanda felt a lump in her throat. She opened her mouth to reply, but found no words. The woman, whose name was Harlow, took a step towards her, her hands still calmly clasped in front of her waist. "You have no right to judge anyone by their appearance, not me, nor any other passenger. Who gave you that power?" The young flight attendant lowered her head, her cheeks burning with shame. Around her the murmurs had faded, replaced by a silence charged with discomfort. "I'm sorry," Amanda murmured, but her voice was barely a whisper. "It's not me you should apologize to," Harlow replied firmly, her eyes sweeping across the rest of the cabin. "It's to all those you've judged unfairly, today and before today, because I'm sure this isn't the first incident of this kind, is it?" The atmosphere in the cabin was now thick, as if Harlow's words had left an invisible weight on each of those present. Some passengers, who had earlier found the situation amusing, lowered their gaze, avoiding looking in her direction. The man in the expensive suit cleared his throat and, after a moment of hesitation, spoke. "Madam, I also owe you an apology. I laughed earlier when I thought you didn't belong here. I was wrong." Harlow looked at him for a moment and then nodded slightly. The woman with the glittering necklace, who had been avoiding everyone's eyes, finally spoke, though her voice trembled. I am also sorry for what I thought and what I said in my mind." The captain, still standing beside Amanda, bowed his head to Harlow. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, in a voice laden with regret, "I understand that what has occurred is inexcusable. I personally commit to reporting this incident and ensuring our staff receive the appropriate training so that something like this never happens again. I apologize on behalf of the entire crew." For a moment, Harlow didn't reply. Her eyes, as sharp as her posture, softened slightly as she looked at the captain. "It's not just me you should respect," she finally said. "It's everyone. Every passenger who boards this plane deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. Understood?" The captain nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, madam." Harlow slowly sat down again, as if with that act the judgment had concluded. The passengers began to resume their positions, but the atmosphere in the cabin had irrevocably changed. The plane landed smoothly at San Francisco Airport, but for many of those traveling in the first-class cabin, the experience still weighed on their minds. As passengers began to gather their belongings, murmurs filled the space once more, though this time with a different tone, more reflective, less superficial. However, the most significant change began to unfold in a quiet corner of the flight. One of the passengers, a young man with glasses and a simple T-shirt who had observed everything from his seat in the back row, had recorded the key moment of the confrontation. He couldn't shake the feeling of indignation he had felt upon hearing Amanda's words and seeing the imperturbable calm with which Harlow had handled the situation. With just a few taps on his mobile phone, the video was posted on social media, accompanied by a short text. "This happened on a Horizon Airways flight. Judge for yourselves." The impact was immediate. Within hours, the video accumulated hundreds of thousands of views, with comments ranging from outrage to support. Some people applauded Harlow for her dignity and serenity, while others questioned how a reputable airline could allow such a humiliating incident to occur in its luxury cabin. Harlow's phrase, clear and forceful, resonated especially in the public conversation. "You have no right to judge anyone by their appearance." Turned into subtitles in the video, this line became a cry of protest against everyday prejudice. The press was quick to get involved. Television programs, blogs, and online journalists began sharing the video, analyzing every detail. Some media outlets tried to contact Harlow directly, but she remained silent. In a conference room at Horizon Airways headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. Executives sat around a long table, their faces serious as they looked at the screens in front of them. The video was being played for the third time, although everyone already knew it by heart. "This is unacceptable," said the CEO, a silver-haired man with a stern tone. "We need to control this narrative before it causes further damage to our reputation." A public relations woman raised her hand. "I suggest we issue an immediate apology and publicly commit to reviewing our customer service policies. If we don't, the consequences could be catastrophic." The CEO nodded slowly. "And what do we do about the flight attendant?" "She will be suspended while we conduct an internal investigation," another voice replied from the back. "This shows we need a restructuring in our staff training." The decision was swift. That same afternoon, Horizon Airways issued a statement on its social media channels and called a press conference. In its statement, they reaffirmed their commitment to the respect and dignity of all passengers, regardless of their appearance or background, and promised to take concrete steps to prevent something like this from happening again. Meanwhile, Amanda was in her small flat, sitting in front of her computer screen, feeling the weight of criticism fall upon her shoulders like an unstoppable storm. Her name had not been mentioned in the video, but many social media users had already identified her, leaving thousands of comments on her personal profiles. "How can you treat someone like that? You're an embarrassment to all service workers. I hope you get fired. People like you don't deserve to work with the public. What made you think you had the right to judge that woman?" Amanda closed her computer and covered her face with her hands. Tears flowed freely, mingling with the feeling of shame and regret that had consumed her since the plane landed. She had never imagined that a single mistake could crumble her whole world in this way. Deep down, she knew that what she had done was wrong. She had allowed her own prejudices to dominate her, and now the consequences were inevitable. Harlow, meanwhile, was at home. The phone had been ringing non-stop since she arrived. Journalists, industry colleagues, even old friends she hadn't contacted in years wanted to hear her side of the story, but she ignored them all, remaining true to her reserved nature. When she finally spoke to one of her office assistants, her words were simple but filled with conviction. "I don't want to be the center of attention," she said, as she watched the sunset from her window. "This isn't about me. The important thing is not who made the mistake, but what we do to learn from it. I want this to be a turning point, not just a scandal." Harlow's message reached the ears of the Horizon Airways executives, who hastened to include those words in their action plans. They knew that their founder's integrity was something that should be respected, and at the same time used to demonstrate that the company was committed to real change. Meanwhile, Amanda was called to a meeting with the human resources team. Uncertainty tormented her, but she knew she had to face the consequences of her actions. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to be a topic of conversation across the country. Some criticized Horizon Airways for its apparent lack of preparedness in situations of this kind, while others pointed out that the incident reflected deeper problems in society, where appearances still dictated the treatment people received. Weeks after the incident, Amanda found herself walking hesitantly through the grand entrance of Horizon Airways headquarters in San Francisco. The glass-paneled building reflected the morning sun, a sleek symbol of modern success. But Amanda felt anything but successful. Her palms were damp, and her heart raced as she clutched the email invitation. Harlow had requested a private meeting. No details had been given, only a date, time, and location. Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was a prelude to her dismissal. She had spent sleepless nights since the flight, replaying the events in her mind, imagining all the ways she could have acted differently. She took a deep breath as a receptionist escorted her to a small, minimalist conference room. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of airplanes from Horizon's history. In the center, a long wooden table gleamed under soft lighting. At the far end of the table sat Harlow, her hands resting lightly on the polished surface, her expression unreadable. "Please come in," Harlow said, her voice calm yet commanding. Amanda stepped inside, her legs feeling unsteady. She sat down across from Harlow, avoiding her gaze at first, but eventually lifting her eyes to meet the older woman's steady, penetrating stare. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't hostile. Harlow seemed to be observing Amanda, weighing her with the same quiet intensity that had unnerved her on the flight. Finally, Harlow broke the silence. "Tell me, Amanda, what have you learned from all of this?" Amanda's throat tightened. She hadn't expected the question, though perhaps she should have. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears that threatened to spill. She began, her voice cracking. She paused, inhaling deeply before continuing. "I've learned that I was wrong. I let my assumptions, my prejudices, control the way I treated you. I made a terrible mistake, and Her words faltered as emotion overtook her. Harlow waited patiently, her expression unchanged. "I judged you," Amanda finally admitted, her voice trembling. "I judged you because of how you looked, because you didn't fit the image I thought belonged in first class. And in doing that, I disrespected you and everyone else I've probably treated the same way without even realizing it." She lowered her gaze again, her face hot with shame. "I'm sorry, truly sorry." Harlow leaned back slightly, her hands clasped together. For a moment, Amanda feared she might not respond. Then the older woman spoke, her tone measured and deliberate. "Mistakes," Harlow began, "are inevitable. We all make them, whether we're young or old, inexperienced or seasoned. But mistakes don't define who we are. Do you know what does?" Amanda looked up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Harlow's. She shook her head slightly, unsure of what to say. "The way we correct them," Harlow said firmly. "The choices we make after we've realized we were wrong. That's what defines us." Her words hung in the air like a verdict, heavy but not damning. Amanda felt the weight of them settle in her chest, a strange mix of guilt and hope. Harlow's gaze softened slightly as she continued. "When I started Horizon Airways, I made mistakes too. Many of them. But I learned from them. I surrounded myself with people who challenged me to be better. And now, I'm offering you the same opportunity." Amanda's breath hitched. She hadn't expected forgiveness, let alone this. "You're giving me a second chance?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Harlow replied without hesitation, "but not without conditions." Amanda straightened in her chair, nodding eagerly. "Anything. I'll do whatever it takes." Harlow held up a hand, silencing her. "You need to understand this isn't just about saving your job. It's about becoming a better person, a better professional. I want you to enroll in a training program, one that focuses on customer psychology and diversity awareness. You'll learn how to see people for who they are, not who you think they should be. And once you've completed it, I expect you to return to Horizon with a new perspective and a commitment to treating every passenger with dignity." Amanda nodded again, her throat too tight to speak. "This is your chance to redefine yourself," Harlow continued. "It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But if you're willing to put in the work, I believe you can come out of this a stronger, wiser person." For the first time since the meeting began, Amanda felt a glimmer of hope. She looked at Harlow, this woman who had every right to dismiss her, and yet had chosen to offer her redemption instead. "Thank you," Amanda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Harlow gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We'll see." In the weeks that followed, Amanda's days were filled with lessons that challenged her deeply. She learned about implicit bias, the subtle ways prejudice could seep into everyday interactions. The instructors didn't preach or scold. Instead, they told stories. Stories of people who had been dismissed, mistreated, or misunderstood because they didn't fit someone else's expectations. Amanda began to see her own past behavior in those stories. She remembered faces, voices, moments where she might have done better. Each realization stung, but she embraced the discomfort. She knew it was necessary. Outside the classroom, Amanda volunteered at a local community center. The center supported people who often went unseen, homeless individuals, immigrants, and others who struggled to find their footing in society. On her first day, Amanda met Elena, a grandmother who had immigrated to the city decades ago. Elena spoke little English and wore clothes that were clean but threadbare. Amanda noticed how the older woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a cup of tea. "Thank you for coming," Amanda said, handing her a plate of cookies. Elena looked up and smiled, a soft, grateful expression that melted away Amanda's nervousness. "De nada," Elena replied, her voice gentle. Over time, Amanda came to know many like Elena, people who had endured far more than she ever could imagine. Their resilience humbled her, and their kindness, even in the face of struggle, inspired her. At Horizon Airways, changes were underway as well. The company had been under scrutiny since the video of Amanda and Harlow went viral. Public outrage had simmered down, but the airline's leadership knew they needed to act decisively to rebuild trust. A mandatory training program on respect and understanding was rolled out for all employees. From executives to cabin crew, everyone participated. The sessions weren't easy. Many employees resisted at first, grumbling about political correctness and the inconvenience of it all. But gradually, as the stories and lessons sank in, attitudes began to shift. The leadership team also instituted an anonymous feedback system, encouraging employees to report incidents of bias or mistreatment. The message was clear. Horizon Airways would hold itself accountable, not just to its customers, but to its workforce. Public perception of Horizon Airways began to change. Articles appeared in newspapers and online, praising the company's proactive response. Customers shared positive experiences on social media, noting the improved attentiveness of staff and the genuine warmth in their interactions. One post read, "I just flew Horizon for the first time since the Harlow incident. The difference is night and day. They're really trying, and it shows." Another customer commented, "Had the kindest flight attendant today. Respect really does make a difference." The shift wasn't instant, but it was steady. People began to view the airline not as a company mired in scandal, but as one willing to learn and grow. For Amanda, the journey of change was deeply personal. Each day she felt herself becoming more aware, more empathetic. She no longer saw passengers as mere profiles to manage or problems to solve. Instead, she saw them as individuals, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles. One evening, after finishing a shift at the community center, Amanda sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting the buildings in a warm, golden light. She thought about Harlow, about the woman's grace under pressure, her refusal to lash out, despite having every reason to do so. Amanda felt a pang of gratitude. Harlow hadn't just given her a second chance. She had taught her a lesson that went beyond work or professionalism. It was a lesson about humanity, about the power of seeing and respecting others for who they truly were. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of chairs, draped in the airline's signature blue and gold, faced a stage lit softly by overhead spotlights. Behind the podium, a large banner hung, proclaiming in bold letters, Horizon Airways, 30 years of flying forward together. The air carried a sense of occasion, an acknowledgement not just of the company's success, but of the trials that had shaped its journey. Among the crowd were employees, executives, and long-time passengers. Some had been loyal to Horizon for decades, while others were there to witness the moment of reckoning the company had promised, a commitment to progress, respect, and inclusivity. At the center of it all sat Harlow, poised but unassuming in the front row. She wore a simple navy dress, her presence quiet yet commanding. Beside her sat Amanda, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her pulse raced, her nerves barely contained as she prepared for what was to come. The program began with speeches from the CEO and other leaders. They spoke of the airline's humble beginnings, the challenges it had overcome, and the vision for its future. The audience listened politely, applauding at appropriate moments. But it was clear that the room was waiting for the heart of the event, Harlow's speech. When her name was announced, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Harlow rose gracefully, her steps deliberate as she approached the podium. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, meeting the eyes of employees, executives, and even a few familiar faces from the infamous flight. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and calm. "When I started Horizon Airways, I dreamed of creating more than just an airline. I wanted to build a bridge, a way for people to connect, to share moments, and to experience the world beyond their own horizons." She paused, letting her words settle. But dreams don't come without challenges, and as this company grew, so did the responsibility to honor the values we stood for: respect, dignity, and kindness. These aren't just words. They are the foundation of everything we do. Harlow's speech was powerful yet measured, weaving stories from the company's history with the lessons learned in recent months. She didn't shy away from addressing the incident that had thrust Horizon into the public spotlight. What happened that day on Flight 452 wasn't just a personal affront, it was a reflection of how easy it is to let assumptions cloud our judgment. But what I've seen since then gives me hope. This company has faced its mistakes and committed to change, and that, I believe, is where true strength lies. The audience was captivated, some nodding in agreement, others dabbing at their eyes. As she concluded her speech, Harlow turned toward Amanda, who now sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. "And now," Harlow said, her voice soft but firm, "I'd like to invite someone very special to the stage. Someone who has walked a difficult path and shown the courage to grow. Amanda, would you join me?" There was a moment of silence as Amanda rose, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the still room. Her palms were damp, and her throat felt tight, but she moved forward, determined. When she reached the podium, she glanced at Harlow, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Turning to face the crowd, Amanda gripped the edges of the podium. Her voice trembled as she began. "Good evening," she said, her words almost a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Good evening, everyone. I don't know if there's a perfect way to say what I need to say tonight, but I'm going to try." The audience leaned in, their attention fully on her. Amanda exhaled shakily. "When I stepped onto that flight months ago, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was good at my job, that I treated people fairly. But the truth is, I wasn't seeing people for who they really were. I was seeing them through the narrow lens of my own assumptions." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "That day, I made a mistake, a terrible one. I disrespected someone who deserved nothing but kindness and dignity. I failed not just her, but everyone on that plane. and I've carried that with me every single day since. Amanda's eyes scanned the crowd, landing briefly on a few passengers she recognized from that flight. Some of them smiled softly. Others nodded in silent encouragement. "I want to apologize," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "to Ms. Harlow, for the way I treated her. To the passengers, for the experience I ruined. And to my colleagues, for falling short of the standards we should all uphold." She turned to Harlow, her voice trembling once more. "Thank you for giving me the chance to learn, to grow, and to make things right. I promise I won't waste it." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite kind, it was genuine, heartfelt, and sustained. Amanda stepped back, tears shining in her eyes, as Harlow approached the podium once more. When the applause died down, Harlow spoke, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Amanda's journey reminds us of something crucial. Mistakes are inevitable. What matters is how we respond to them. Do we hide from them, or do we face them head-on and strive to do better?" She paused, looking out over the crowd. Respect isn't a privilege reserved for the wealthy, the powerful, or the well-dressed. It's a right, one that belongs to every single person, regardless of who they are or where they come from. It's the foundation of our humanity. The audience rose to their feet, the applause swelling once more. Harlow and Amanda stood side by side, the moment a testament to the power of accountability, forgiveness, and growth. As the event concluded and people began to disperse, Amanda lingered near the stage. Several passengers approached her, offering words of support. "You've come a long way," one woman said, squeezing her hand. "Thank you for owning up to it. That takes courage." Amanda nodded, her heart full. She glanced toward Harlow, who was speaking with a group of executives, but caught her eye and smiled. For the first time in months, Amanda felt at peace. She had faced her past, learned from it, and emerged stronger. And in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. La historia presenta un poderoso viaje de transformación personal y profesional, destacando la capacidad humana de aprender de los errores y crecer a partir de ellos. Amanda, la protagonista, empieza como alguien atrapada en prejuicios y suposiciones. Pero su encuentro con Harlow, una mujer de impresionante fortaleza y dignidad, se convierte en un catalizador para un cambio profundo. El recorrido de Amanda no solo es una lección de humildad, sino también un recordatorio de cómo nuestras acciones, incluso las más pequeñas, pueden impactar a otros. Al enfrentarse a sus fallos, Amanda demuestra que el verdadero valor no está en evitar errores, sino en enfrentarlos con responsabilidad y determinación. La presencia de Harlow añade profundidad al relato, representando los valores fundamentales de respeto, empatía y justicia. Su firmeza al abordar la situación y su disposición a dar segundas oportunidades muestran el poder del liderazgo compasivo. La narrativa subraya una lección esencial. El respeto no es un lujo reservado para algunos, sino un derecho inherente a todos. La historia nos invita a reflexionar sobre nuestros propios prejuicios y a esforzarnos por construir un mundo donde cada persona sea valorada por su humanidad, no por las apariencias. Si esta historia tocó tu corazón, no olvides darle me gusta y compartirla. Deja un comentario para contarnos cómo te ha inspirado y, si aún no lo has hecho, suscríbete al canal. Que Dios te bendiga y te acompañe en cada paso de tu camino.